1 week before Hurricane Katrina, musician Josh Charles moved to New Orleans with plans to record an album there. Like so many in the Big Easy back in 2005, the storm and its aftermath would forever change his life. His most recent project is a single devoted to the people of the Big Easy called Healing Time. All proceeds from the song go toward the continuing reconstruction in the city. In just a moment, he'll perform Healing Time for us. But first, Josh, nice to have you on the program.
Thank you, Tavis. It's a pleasure being here.
You walked on. I asked you before we came on camera whether or not you were still living in the city, and you said, I tried. What do you mean by that?
Well, I attempted to move to New Orleans after so many years of falling in love with it. August 25th of 2005, 4 days before the storm, evacuated the city, and I since went back many, many times. And my goal was to try and move back there at some point soon enough. But I feel like I'm more of a wandering nomad now, you know, going around and trying to help bring attention and awareness back to New Orleans.
What do you make in your own life of being in love with the city, being in love with the music and the culture the city has produced, going there 4 days, and the storm comes and runs you out? What do you make of that?
A sign, perhaps. It is such an incredible place, and arriving there in the dense heat of the summer, and I mean, it has its own atmosphere, its own vibe. But I think when I got the last bus out of Houston and we were driving away, a lot of us wondered if we'd ever see it again. It was such dramatic, you know. There was such a tension that we were never going to see New Orleans. It was going to be sunk. It was 20 foot of water, and it came close.
To your point now of getting out, so how did you get out? Give me the details. You got out on a bus to Houston, but tell me more about that.
Yeah, we all had known that we were going to evacuate on Friday. On Saturday, we would leave. And so on Saturday, a friend of mine that I was staying with took me to try to get a flight. There was no flights. Tried to get a train out. There was no train. Got to the bus station. The bus station was closed, and he had a friend who worked at the station and let me in, and I got the last bus out to Houston. And this was a day before the storm actually hit. So people really couldn't get out if they didn't have a car. So, I mean, I almost felt like I was trapped, but thankfully I was able to evacuate.
Let me back up. What attracted you in detail to the city that made you move there before the storm?
I've always, I was mentored by Dr. John. I met him when
Great artist.
Yeah, I met him when I was a teenager, and I fell in love with New Orleans the first time I visited there. I grew up in Kansas City, which was a blues town and a jazz town, but I always loved New Orleans. I desperately wanted to go to school there and live there, and it was just one of those places that once you go there, it sort of takes its effect on you, the spirit, the magic. For me, the music was the most important thing. The music from New Orleans is unique to anywhere else in the world.
Yeah. You started out, though, being classically trained.
I was classically trained.
How did that turn happen for you?
I was listening to a blues hour in Kansas City on the radio, and they had a New Orleans piano hour. And I heard this guy named James Booker, who was become my ultimate hero as a piano player, and he was contemporaries with Dr. John and Art Neville and Alan Toussaint and Professor Longhair. And I just heard this style of piano that I couldn't play. And I was like, I got to learn how to play this. I got to figure out how to do this. And that's where it began. Yeah.
Tell me about your life. I'll come back to the project in just a second. But tell me about your life since getting on that last bus to Houston.
Well, it was very interesting. I evacuated to Houston. I ended up back in Kansas City. And about a month later, Dr. John came through town. And I told him, you know, I was planning on making a record in New Orleans at the studio. It was wiped out. I still want to go back there as soon as I possibly can to record. And he said, well, listen, a lot of my guys lost their homes. Why don't you record with them? And so we went back down in December, and the city was still, I mean, it was still a wasteland in a sense. It was just terrible. And a lot of the city wasn't even open. So I remember driving to the recording studio, and there was no power. You drive through blackness, and we ended up recording there. It was the only studio left in the Bywater, and we started the record there. And while I was in New Orleans, a family that I was staying with took me on a tour of the devastation and the destruction beyond the points that you could go publicly. And that was where I just, you know, you see it on TV, but seeing it in person, it had a whole nother effect on me.
What do you make these years later now? What do you make, Josh, of the slow pace of recovery? It is not, to use your term, a wasteland the way it was when you were there, and I've been there a number of times since then as well. So it's no longer a wasteland, but no one would argue, especially the folk who still live there, who are watching us right now, that the recovery, the pace of it is still slow. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, obviously there's a lot of blame that went on the previous administration. I think the problem is that when things happen, there's a lot of attention to them right away, and then they sort of fade away, and it becomes like, if you're not hearing about it, you assume it's all right. When people found out I was doing this project, they're like, well, New Orleans, that was 4 years ago. I'm like, you realize it's half the population still missing. And when they said 85% of the city flooded, they weren't lying. I mean, and you've been there. And so all you have to do is go there and realize that. I think people just aren't thinking about it because there's so many problems going on in the world and in the country today. But what really disturbs me is New Orleans is a treasure. It's the cultural birthplace of rock and roll, jazz and blues, and food and culture in this country. It should be preserved like a museum. And so that's the part that really, really bothers me, that the people aren't paying attention to this treasure of a city.
To your point now, your latter point, how then does a project like this break through, I was going to say break the noise. In fact, pardon my English, it ain't really noise, it's silence. How do you get people to move beyond what might be described as New Orleans Katrina fatigue,
right,
4 years later?
Right. Well, I think one of the things is, I mean, I wrote this song called Healing Time after walking around areas of New Orleans and seeing this devastation and thinking, oh my God, how much healing time is it going to take to fix this? And we released the song to benefit the city. And I think a lot of times people now, well, we can't give any more money, we can't give this or that. And so we put the song out for 99 cents. Which means that $1, if 1 million people download it, $1 million is going to go a long, long way to rebuilding. And a lot of the efforts down in New Orleans are all volunteer-based. They're not getting federal money. They're not getting grants anymore. And so it has to be done through private donations to rebuild the city. And everybody I've talked to so far really thinks that the city does need to be rebuilt. And they want to help, but they really don't know how they can help. And so I said, well, this is a great opportunity because even your 99 cents will make a difference.
How you doing on your goal of 1 million sales?
We're doing well. Yeah. You know, we're getting, I mean, this is the month, we're in the anniversary month. We're 2 weeks away from the anniversary. So I think it's finally come back into people's minds, the forefront of their minds that, hey, wait a minute, we live in the United States. This is happening in our country. There's a lot of problems happening in our country, but, you know, this is a city that people go to and they never forget it when they go there. I mean, have you ever, you go there and it has that something special. And so I think it comes into people's minds that we need to do something again. And this is why we're really out here pushing really hard. Our goal is to raise 1 million downloads, $1 million through the sale of this song, Healing Time, which I'm donating all of the money to the Preservation Resource Center, which since Katrina has rebuilt 200 homes. Green homes, so they don't even tear down the homes that need to be torn down. They rebuild the homes in the architectural integrity, kept the architectural integrity to the city that makes New Orleans special.
You referenced the previous administration. What's your sense of what this new administration ought to be doing where New Orleans is concerned?
Well, I mean, hopefully they're going to pay attention to it. I know that what I've read and what I've heard is that there's definitely, New Orleans is on the agenda, but like even healthcare and the economy, I mean, where does the priority lie? And I mean, even with Healing Time is a song I wrote for New Orleans personally, but I think everybody needs healing time. I mean, this country could sure use healing time, the economy, and everything going on in this country. So the song has actually grown beyond just uniquely New Orleans, but I'm donating the money to the city that I believe really needs the help.
Before I make room for you to perform here right quick, tell me a bit about the lyrics. I'm always turned on by lyrics. It's called Healing Time, but tell me about the lyrical content.
Well, the second verse of the song has the lyrics, when you've lost all your possessions and all you're left with are memories, and the house where you grew up has been washed away. I mean, metaphorically, obviously, the house could be anything. Specifically to New Orleans, the house is literally somebody's house. And all you need is healing time to make it through the pain and the sorrow. Forget the pain and the sorrow. There'll be a better tomorrow. I wrote the song in the sense of like a second line in New Orleans where it starts off somber, and then it comes to the point where you know, there's healing within the song. And that was my goal, was to create some sense of a serious nature, but also feeling good. And everybody, even like my bass player who played on the record, when we were doing the session, called me up and he's like, I just got into a fight with my girlfriend, I put the song on, and all of a sudden, you know, I feel better. You know, I've had some healing time, you know what I'm saying?
Let me go pop this in right now then. All right, so you had a bad day and you need some healing in your relationship or in your life. Up next, Josh Charles and his tribute to the people of New Orleans with some lyrics that might even work for you in your own situation. Josh, nice to have you here.
Thank you so much.